that I want to make today. You know let's call it the Deleuze-Judith Butler narrative. It's not quite fair. I know they are not the same, but and it's more refined. But at least what I will tell you now is how it works popularly. We have the official narrative, let's call it like this, which is there is normal sex, heterosexual, straight, whatever, and then we have these childish games which, if they are not refocused on normal straight copulation, they remain a perversion. The only justification for perversions is if they are, in a Hegelian sense, aufgehoben, sublated, synthesized, kept but changed, transfunctionalized, whatever, used as subordinated moments for genital sex. Like, if I like to look at you naked and kiss you, it's bad if this is the ultimate goal. If it's a foreplay to proper penetration, it's okay to be vulgar. This is, I agree, the standard patriarchal normative version, blah, blah. But I claim the opposite version, let's call it Butler-Deleuze version, which is that we have some kind of a polymorphous, perverse paradise of particular practices, this paradisic almost plurality, which is then, in a violent way, synthesized or normativized through their subordination to genital patriarchal paradigm, is also false. There is no primordial, innocent, pre-genital paradise of plurality of perversions which we can enjoy, and then bad patriarchal order comes and subordinates it. In other words, it is not enough to reassert infantile sexuality as the plural multitude of polymorphous perverse drives, which are then totalized by the Oedipal genital norm. Infantile sexuality is not a truth or base or some kind of original productive side of sexuality, which is then oppressed, totalized, regulated by the genital norm. The idea here is that, and here again I admire Lenka Zupancic. She developed this now in it's still unpublished, wonderful text, that nonetheless, copulation, to be vulgar, fuck, is a central point. But precisely as such, it escapes normativity. This is what Lacan means by there is no sexual relationship, that this cognitive question, as it were, is never answered. That, how to put it, we do have this perverse, polymorphous, more masturbatory practices. I kiss you, you squeeze me, whatever, or even more. But all this is already against the background of a certain gap, hole. And this hole, cognitive hole, could have been filled in by a full fuck, if you want, full genital sex, but precisely this cannot be done. There is no knowledge here. There is no formula for sex, which is why real sex, in the sense of full sex copulation, has to be forever filled in, its space has to be sustained by perverse scenarios. What do I mean by this? And now comes the nice point that I want to make. I hope this will convince you. Already Lacan says something which is so typical that it was absolutely censored. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I did my best asking around, and no one told me of even one example where someone noticed this absolutely crucial statement in Lacan's Seminar 20, Feminine Sexuality, Encore, where Lacan says something, again, I hate people when they do this, because I would like to be the one to do this. You know, this simple observation that once you make it, it's so obvious. Namely, Lacan turns around completely the standard idea that Catholic, Christian, especially Catholic Church, its sexual teaching privileges genital sexuality, normative sexuality, at the expense of oppressed, perverse, infantile, whatever drives, and so on and so on. As if, you know, all these perverse drives, they are oppressed. The only thing that the church tolerates is genital, straight, heterosexuality, and so on and so on. It's absolutely not true. The opposite is true. Here is the quote from Lacan, the crucial one, from, Encore. Christ, even when resurrected from the dead, is valued for his body, and his body is the means by which communion in his presence is incorporation, oral drive, with which Christ's wife, the church, as it is called, contents itself very well, having nothing to expect from copulation. In everything that followed from the effects of Christianity, particularly in art, everything is exhibition of the body evoking jouissance, excessive enjoyment. And you can lend credence to the testimony of someone who has just come back from an orgy of churches in Italy, and so on and so on. So what Lacan, again, is saying here is that if you look at the church imaginary and art, it is full of these oral, anal drives. You can have saints eating shit, fondling each other, burning, whatever. Never fucking. Copulation is prohibited in church imaginary. So again, Lacan is very clear here. One should reject the endlessly repeated critical thesis that the Catholic sexual morality imposes normative heterosexuality on the subversive and destabilizing polymorphous sexuality of humans. In contrast to the idea that partial drives are masturbatory, asocial, and so on, while genital sexuality grounds social link, family as an elementary social forum, one should insist that there is nothing necessarily asocial in partial drives. They function as the glue of society, as the very staff of communion, in contrast to the heterosexual couple. That's the basic thesis of Lacan. That if you look at these institutions which are, for Freud in his group psychology and analysis of the ego, the model of groups, army, church, they are full of these famous pregenital, oral, anal drives, mechanisms of incorporation, anal distraction, and so on. What they feel threatened by is precisely a couple, copulation. And Freud says this directly in his group psychology. I quote Freud: directly sexual tendencies are unfavorable to the formation of groups. Two people coming together for the purpose of sexual satisfaction are making a demonstration against the herd instinct, against the group feeling. The more they are in love, the more completely they are sufficient for each other. In the great artificial groups, there is no room for woman as a sexual object, and so on and so on. So again, I quote here Alenka Zupancic, who puts this in wonderful terms. So there is something profoundly disruptive at stake in copulation. For the kind of social bond it proposes, copulation, Christianity doesn't need, for the kind of social bond that Christianity proposes, it doesn't need copulation, which functions as the superfluous element, something on top of what would be ideally needed. Indeed, natural copulation is utterly bent from the religious imaginary, whereas this imaginary doesn't recede from images of canonized saints eating the excrements shit of another person. If looked at from this perspective, Christianity is indeed all about jouissance of the body, about the body of God as constituting another person's jouissance. Partial drives and the satisfaction they procure are rather abundantly present, and in this sense, one would be justified in claiming that in its libidinal aspect, the Christian religion massively relies on what belongs to the register of infantile sexuality. Satisfaction and bonding by way of partial objects with the exclusion of sexual coupling. The pure enjoyment for the sake of enjoyment, is not exactly what is banned here. What is banned or repressed is its link with sexuality, particularly in the form of copulation. And here I go against Foucault, who proposes as a big revolution that we should decouple pleasures from sexuality. Well, that's what the church is doing. So again, Christianity fully acknowledges the polymorphous perverse satisfactions of drives, but it desexualizes the pleasure they provide. Pleasures as such, again, are not problematic. As you know, Christian literature abounds with the descriptions of ecstatic heavenly pleasures provided by meditations, prayers, rituals, and so on. Again, why? Why this oppression of sexuality? Okay, maybe it's time slowly for me to stop. Just to conclude, now I come to the crucial point. I would say that because what happens in copulation is precisely a certain coupling of two dimensions which make it problematic for this church vision. We have, on the one hand, sexuality in the sense of partial drives. You cannot find satisfaction, do this, touch the person that way, put a finger up there, squeeze him that way, maybe it will work, blah, blah. This is the technical stuff of how to do it. And then we have the, let's call it, intersubjective link. But isn't the tendency today that the two should be kept apart or subordinated to each other? Either, on the one hand, if you are frigid, impotent, whatever, it's treated as a problem of partial drives. I claim that the ideal today is that sexual topic is reduced to the problem of partial drives, as if it's just some malfunctioning. You cannot get an erection, do this, blah, blah, blah.